Hello, everybody. I just want to thank you all for coming down here today to the Mills Fabrica here in King's Cross, London. I'd like to thank Dezeen and London Craft Week as well. And I just wanted to give you a little lowdown of why we're here at the Mills Fabrica today in London. The Mills Fabrica and what we're trying to do here is really build a community of like-minded people, innovators and startups. And really, the aim is to support them with our co-working space, along with our innovation gallery that you see behind us, along with our incubator and investment fund, which is really focused on investing in companies that want to make systematic change within the fashion industry around eco-innovation and sustainability. And on that note, I'd like to pass you over to Cajsa, who's going to introduce you to our panel. And again, thanks again for coming down, and look forward to the discussion.
Great,
Cheers.
Thank you so much, Nikita. I'm Cajsa Carlsson, I'm Deputy Editor of Dezeen, and I want to thank you all again, as Nikita said, for joining us today for this talk on pioneering innovation in making. And with me today is Jen Keane, who is the co-founder of the biotech company Modern Synthesis. And we're also joined by Patrik Lundstrom, who is the CEO of Swedish company Renewcell, and by Craig Smith, who is the Research and Development Director. I keep wanting to say R&D, but it's Research and Development at Pangaia. So to kind of kick this talk off, I'm going to basically ask each of the panelists to tell us a little bit about their company and what they do. And yeah, Jen, if we can start with you.
Hi guys, I'm Jen. I'm co-founder, CEO of Modern Synthesis. We're a London-based biomaterial company, really looking to craft the next generation of materials with biology. We've developed a microbial textile platform, really aimed at creating a new category of non-woven textiles aimed at fashion and helping reduce emissions, but also looking holistically at building circular supply chains around materials.
Thank you so much. And Patrik, moving on to you.
I'm CEO of Renewcell. At Renewcell, we are recycling textiles. So we take your old jeans, my old jeans, other type of textiles, and we put them into our process, and we produce a dissolving pulp out of that, which is then used by viscose producers to make viscose fibers, and then being spun into new yarns, new textiles, and then new clothes, of course. And then we can take it back again. So what our aim is, what we actually have been proven that we can do, is to, in industrial scale, make fashion sustainable and circular.
That's really exciting. And you have an installation here behind us as well, so we'll talk a bit more about that in a bit, I think, which is great. And then Craig, moving on to you, tell us a bit about what you do at Pangaia and what Pangaia does.
Sure. So I'm Craig. I'm the Research and Development Director at Pangaia. I lead a multidisciplinary research team focused on scouting, researching, developing, engineering, and also commercializing material innovation. That might be surprising for some people. Most people know Pangaia as the brightly colored sweatshirts and track pants and hoodies. But actually, we position ourselves as a material science company, and we're really focused on accelerating materials innovation in the apparel and accessories industry.
Yeah, and you have an installation here as well that we might mention a bit later on. That's it's just like a very thrilling way of creating new dyes for fashion. So I'm excited to hear more about that. And we're going to sort of move through some like broader questions, but we'll also do some individual questions for the panelists. And maybe starting with you, Jen, I think of all your companies, yours is the one that I kind of understand the least. So if you could just tell us a bit about what does it do? How did it start? What's the process?
Oh man, where do I begin? So we actually grow materials. So
and you have an example here as well, sorry.
Yes, we've got the shoe in the background. That was actually my MA project out of Central St. Martin's a few years ago, which was called This Is Grown. And that was the early version of our now process that we've developed since then. And the point of that project was really looking at biomaterials as a way to not only just replace the materials we have today and like looking at leathers and textiles and synthetic leathers, with like for like, but really replacing them with new types of materials that enable creativity and allow us to design and create in new ways. the way that we worked with this bacteria that produces a material called nanocellulose, which is a super fine, strong form of cellulose, which is the building block of most of the natural world. But it's a particularly fine form of that. The way that it grows is really interesting as well, in that the bacteria kind of trail fibers of nanocellulose behind them. It looks a little bit like a weaving shuttle. And my background in the textiles industry and sportswear, it reminded me of that. And so that was the initial idea around building a new type of textile using the way that these bacteria grow. From then, it's kind of a combination of a textile process. So we do use textile elements, traditional yarns, and as well as new textile processes together with a bioprocess. So we're growing the biofilm with the bacteria, combining that together with this textile process to create like really fundamentally new types of nonwovens, which is really exciting. Again, I'm a material nerd, so I would say that. But I think also for looking at applications in fashion, we're looking forward to being able to work with designers and brands to reimagine like how does this change products and what we can do with them.
And once you have the material, once that's constructed, what's the kind of life cycle of it? And can you then break it back down to the original material? Or how
so I mean, the way that we're approaching sustainability is trying to be holistic about it. So, I mean, emissions are the first challenge and something that we need to bring down quickly as an industry. And there's easy steps that, you know, big organizations are taking. We're looking at the next step of that of how do we build fully circular supply chains. So the way and why we think microbes are the answer to that is these bugs are able to convert sugars from like waste sources, so agricultural waste, fruit waste, whatnot, into this high quality fiber. So you're able to use this biomass that would just basically be wasted into like high quality materials. On the flip side of that, it's cellulosic. So kind of like a paper or a cotton or other cellulosic materials, it can be recycled into cellulosic recycling streams. Good lead-in. But also it can be biodegraded in certain applications where that makes sense. But really it's about building what that full process looks like for different product cycles.
So you're kind of creating a new material that's more sustainable, whereas Patrik, you're working with existing materials and trying to create a circular kind of I suppose a way of using materials already existing so that we don't have to create new materials. Is that a fair point?
Yeah, that's a fair point. I mean, if you look at Utopia, we see that the industry and all industries actually need to be circular. I mean, we cannot keep on pumping up oil, growing different crops and so forth, which is in the end is difficult to do because when you grow, for example, cotton, it's monocultures, enormous monocultures. And when you have monocultures, you need to have fertilizers and pesticides. And that is, of course, damaging the environment around. Plus, that it uses enormous amounts of water. So what we need to do, at least from our perspective, is to create circularity and use the type of textiles, the use of fibers that we already have. I'm also a material nerd and a chemist, so I sometimes talk about saving the molecule. Every molecule that we produce and all the materials that we produce require a lot of energy in order to create the forms that we actually do on molecular levels. And we need to create circularity in that, because if we start, breaking everything down in the end, then we need to put energy into it again in order to build it up. So that's what we're trying to do, and the beauty is that we have a technology now that actually work in industrial scale, where we are creating full circularity. So as I mentioned from the start here, we're using used textiles. We're using old jeans, T-shirts, shirts, and what have you. And it doesn't matter what color it is, if we're taking in jeans and buttons and zippers are being separated out. We're also even separating out, contaminants. And contaminants for us is polyesters and nylons and those type of materials, which are quite difficult to do, but we can do that to a certain extent.
Can you do that once you've sort of separated them from the other materials? Can they then be turned into different material?
They could. The problem with plastics is basically this, that you need to have very pure plastics and uncolored plastics in order to be able to recycle them. As soon as you color a plastic, for example, you take in the textile industry, we're talking about recycled polyesters. That is a greenwash in my mind, because you basically take perfectly good PET bottles that could be recycled over and over again, and then you make a fiber out of it, and then you color it, then you can't use it anymore. It goes for incineration directly.
Yeah.
So you're actually destroying a circular system and using that for polyester fibers. Moreover, a majority of the microfibers coming out in our oceans and lakes is actually coming from washing polyester textiles because of the surface area and so forth. So when we talk about recycling, it's important also to understand that it has to be recycled all the way. And once we have produced cellulose fibers, we can take them back into our process and keep on circulating. So come back to your comment there. Yes, in Utopia, we could create a perfect circular system. Now, I mean, that is many, many years ahead. And I think my colleagues here, I mean, they have their technologies, and we need to have a lot of different technologies to serve this. I mean, we can not make shoes, and here you can make shoes out of your materials, and all this material science that you are working on in Pangaia is what we need, because in the end, if you think that we're going to have exactly the same as we had before, I think we're approaching the problem in the wrong way. We need to come up with new ways of actually using materials, and the material science and developments that you are doing is all about that, as far as I see. And it's fantastic that we're now moving ahead in that sense.
And working on different aspects of circular design as well. And we were talking earlier about your colorifics installation here in the back, which is a new technique for dyeing fabrics. Could you tell us a bit about that and what Pangaia is working on?
Yeah, so as a business, we're, as I say, purely focused on scouting, researching, working with early stage innovators. Colorifics, who the Mills team know all too well, an amazing innovator out of Cambridge, and they're essentially focused on the next generation of dyes. And the principle is around a microorganism that you feed a specific DNA reference and a specific code to grow a specific color. So essentially, you're saying to a microorganism, please grow blue. And that microorganism grows, it multiplies, and it essentially becomes a dye stuff. Once you obviously wash your fabric, the microorganism is binding to the fabric, giving the color to the fabric, and then you wash it off, and essentially you've got what is a dyed fabric.
And is that something that could be created at scale? Is that something that could become industry-wide, or is it still quite a small project?
So we launched a small capsule collection with the Colorifics team, but they're very much in scaling mode. And within the next few months, we'll dramatically increase in scale. Yeah. So it's certainly something that, for me, is a huge innovation, and is definitely one that people should keep an eye on, and essentially will be a game changer in dye innovation. Yeah.
And with your 3 companies, I know you're thinking a lot, all of you, about how you can scale up and how you can kind of implement the stuff you're working on a global, well, perhaps not global yet, but on a much larger scale. What do you think, how can fashion companies and innovators help to scale up their innovations so that we can actually see this in more mainstream kind of applications, hopefully like in the next few years?
Well, I mean, if you look at other industries, let's start there, though. If you look at other industries, how they scale when you come to environmentally friendly type of, let's say, systems or technologies. Take the battery systems, for example, for electrical cars. There's a lot of construction of battery factories throughout the world. And the reason investors can invest is that they have offtake agreements from their customers. And I think that's where we need to get to also in our industries. We need to get offtake agreements from brands. As soon as brands have committed, because they have already done so, I mean, they have already, promised their customers that by 2025 they're going to be 100% circular. Or other sustainably sourced. These other sustainably sourced we come back to, because at this moment in time they're just better. They don't exist really. But we need to create that system that brands also. There are no technologies today that are in scale. I mean, we are big. We are in industrial scale today. I mean, we launched in industrial scale throughout the value system. However, the textile industry is today about 110 million tons. And it's growing to 160 million tons by 2030 because we're lifting people out of poverty into middle class, which is absolutely fantastic. But they also want to have several pair of trousers, jeans, dresses, T-shirts, just like us. And we need to help them to have that, but in a sustainable way. And then that means that we're growing this industry with 3 to 4 million tons per year. To build that capacity, we need to have offtake agreements. If we don't have offtake agreements, investors won't invest. But the technologies are there, and we can do it. And we only have 10 years to do it. So it's very important with speed, and it's important with offtake agreements. And I think us representing, let's say, the entrepreneurial type of businesses, we can scale, but we need to have that kind of support.
I think just to add to that, I think what's really good to put in context is essentially we're trying to replace materials that have been used for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And it's not an easy process to switch, particularly one for an industry in terms of the infrastructure that's been built, but also for a consumer.
Yeah.
A consumer has a given expectation around a product and what they expect from it. And to add to your analogy around electrical cars, I think the fact that somebody like Tesla openly publishes their patent portfolio and IP to be used, to be accessed, is something that we need to do more of.
Oh, that's interesting, yeah.
And as a business, we try and do that as well. Of course, we're trying to focus and launch innovation and give it a platform. But ultimately, we have this other avenue of the business, which is the business-to-business aspect. And it's almost this chance to democratize access to innovation.
Sorry, so you want to kind of lead the change, but you don't want to be the only people. You don't want to be the only people making the change.
Yes, I think 2 big words: collaboration and commitment. These are the 2 things that brands can do, and I mean manufacture as well. You're starting to see like all of the startups ecosystem collaborating as well, but really
Sorry.
From an investment standpoint, because it takes a lot of money to scale to the industry size that we have today, and it will take time. But the only way to do that is for brands to really get dug in and work together with startups and commit their resources, their knowledge as well, to help get from those stages and being aware that early stage is not the same as scale and being cognizant and having processes in-house to work with teams.
That's one of the biggest, again, big challenges. But initially, as an innovator, as a startup, I don't speak for you, so feel free to jump in. But of course, the expectation and the ask is to scale and raise investment and ultimately get that more ubiquitous within the industry. There's this kind of middle scale that sometimes is referred to as there's the valley of death, which is essentially where a startup is formed, it's shaped, and there's this gap between, okay, I have something interesting, and broad scale. And where do you get something out to brands, to public, or have the ability to showcase something with the world without going from small scale startup to fully fledged?
How do you do that? What's the secret?
Well, the way we do that at Pangaia, and okay, we're not perfect, but again, what we're trying to do is partner really early with innovators and startups. And a platform that we've built called Pangaia Lab is essentially that. It's an outlet for innovators where they can launch with us, utilize the internal expertise, and launch at an earlier scale in the hundreds. That allows them to innovators to showcase their technologies. And of course, it's a relationship building exercise for us as well.
Yeah. And obviously we're here during London Craft Week, and kind of one aspect that I wanted to discuss a little bit was the kind of influence or perhaps relationship between what we kind of think of as like heritage craft and new materials, because what you're both working on can seem quite groundbreaking and just like something that seems perhaps sci-fi is the wrong word, but it's not something that I would perhaps associate with kind of traditional crafts. But I know you have thoughts on this, Jen. Please tell me.
Oh man, I've been talking about this for years now. I mean, again, coming out of CSM and Material Futures program there, like the original project, I mean, it is very craft-based, and I think there's this perception of science and design and craft as being completely separate worlds. But actually, there's a lot of similarities. And for me, I mean, craft for me is not just like a noun of something we do. It's a process, and that's really intrinsic to the development of these new technologies. Is just trying things out. Having an idea, testing it, iteration, and this craft process is also intrinsic to the scientific process. It's just called by another name. And I think also, like, when we talk about scale, there's also this dichotomy of like, oh, if it's craft, it can't scale. And it's like, no, like, all the scale that we have today, the textiles industry started as a craft industry. And then it grew from there. And all of the machines that we have, all the know-how, all of that came from, individuals that were doing it at home and figured out a better way to do it just by playing around. And I think that aspect of craft in building these new industries and these new materials is so underplayed. And something that we still do in developing new tools and stuff in-house.
Yeah.
Completely agree. I think this is almost like, how do you define craft 2.0?
Yes.
And it's, as you say, kind of there's a lot going on in labs and technical environments, but it's still craft and artisanal in nature in terms of what individuals are doing. And, Jen is a good example of that, of having this craft nature to something that is quite technical, quite lab-based. And, there are, again, multiple options or other avenues in terms of biofabrication and certain alternative leathers that are doing exactly that.
I mean, if you take Renewcell, for example, I mean, we're built on Swedish craft of making pulp and paper. So the company was actually founded by two professors at the Royal Institute of Technology. And Sweden is a pulp and paper nation. So the reason for, let's say, Renewcell coming to life in Sweden is not a coincidence. It's because of the craft that people in generation have been developing. And the other craft I'd like to mention is also, how to run a pulp and paper mill. The people that we have in our plant, they have been doing this for their whole professional life. And these are things that you learn to some extent at universities, but to really get really good at it, to running these type of plants, you need to be out there. And so the whole crafting thing, I think, is really important. The other one I think we need to look into, and that is what you guys are doing, is looking into how can you develop different textiles in a different way and getting the properties you want. Levi's, we launched with Levi's. We have done several launches with Levi's, but also there, I mean, we have launched, let's say the 501s, the iconic 501s, and where we have replaced 40% of the cotton. And you can't feel a difference between them and 100% cotton pair of jeans. So it's exactly the same. And of course, they've been working on how to spin the fibers and how to make the textiles and so forth. So that is this craftsmanships for me is all about iteration and evolution rather than coming up with a Eureka idea.
So building on existing craft knowledge to come up with something new. Yeah. And how close do you think we are? Probably not that close, but how soon will biomaterials become a significant part of kind of everyday fashion? Are we getting closer to people demanding it and it becoming like something that people will pay a bit more for? Like, or will it still be something that people will aim for, but we might not get to full saturation yet for a long time?
I mean, I think this was a big year for biomaterials. I mean, I think it was meant to happen earlier, and then pandemic slowed a few things down. But I mean, mycelium has had a big year, to say the least. Had a big year. And that's, I think, just cracking the surface of what's been going on behind the scenes with a lot of these brands. Same with you guys. You've been at it for a few years, but you're at scale. So like, it's in products now, and I think it's going to start being much more pervasive. Quickly over the next few years, or at least we hope it is, because that's the only way that we can really make the difference that we all started this to do.
But if you look at it, we want to transport ourselves sustainably. Electrical cars, we talked about that. We also, you have this flying shame. You want to be careful with how much you fly and so forth, rather take the train. But we also want to eat sustainably. maybe eat some meat, but not too much. And we're trying actually, as I think as mankind, we're trying to become more sustainable. But that is also coming to the fashion industry and to the textile industry. I mean, look at secondhand. In the past, secondhand was something for somebody who couldn't afford it. Now, secondhand is trendy. People going directly towards secondhand. Can I find it there? It's fantastic, of course. But I think we're going to get to clothes chain eventually. We're going to be
people will be embarrassed to buy new clothes.
Not only new clothes, but maybe clothes that are not sustainable.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, for example, imagine Craig, you and I was sitting on a dinner, let's say a few years down the line. You will be sitting in a sustainable shirt. I will be sitting in a normal cotton shirt. I would feel ashamed. And if people can see that and so forth, he's not really taking responsibility for the environment. And if you look at the younger generations, the generation Greta and so forth, and they are demanding sustainability for good rights. And of course, the brands, they see this. And they get very, very nervous because the technologies are not there. And that's why the things that we are doing is, I feel, we're trying at least, and it's very important. It sounds maybe a little bit presumptuous, but I think what we do is very important to create the technologies for sustainability and for consumers to be able to buy and clothe themselves with a clear conscience.
And to be honest, I think Pangaia was built off and grown through a lot of that demand for more sustainable products. Okay, there's a product that has built up a good online following. I acknowledge that that's part of it, but we're actively asked and have consumers that are chasing that. And I think towards the industry and how does that shift and change, I honestly think the only way to make that change is legislation and financial incentives for brands. Because to your point, there is a need for it, but it doesn't fall into consumers' hands because the price point is not always accessible. And like you said, you guys, you need off-takes to build scale and make those commitments. And there's not a need for brands to make that switch right now.
It's also interesting because I guess as well you could also say that a lot of people are now buying clothes that they see on Instagram, like very kind of fast fashion. So is that the kind of flip side of it? Because fashions move so quickly now that people are expecting new things constantly. Is that hard to work towards as a sustainable brand because you don't have that kind of quick turnover that you have if you can just create things however you want them?
It's a little bit challenging, yeah. I mean, the business was created in the sense of having essentials that were intended to be classics. The fit was a little bit broader, so you could account for different genders, sizes, etc. And we wanted to create, as I say, a focus area that would be broadly accessible to people, but have this element of emotional durability, as we call it. Like everybody has that favorite jacket or that favorite piece of footwear in their wardrobe. What makes you hold on to that? And there's an element of the durability of the material, the design, the color, the aesthetic. So how do you design into classics, which is the challenge that people want to hold on to, sorry. And ultimately, for us, we're always thinking about what is the input to this material and product, and ultimately, what is the end of life? There's obviously it's a middle section there on how do you repair, reuse, recycle. But if you consider the end of life whilst you're designing products, I think that's an area that as an industry we miss.
I fully agree. I mean, design for circularity, that's normally where it starts.
Yeah.
And then we need to use them longer, yes. We also need to secondhand, and we also... but eventually, the clothes will be discarded. And that's where I think we need to have two things. One is recyclability, and these clothes can be recycled. But truly, the other one is for those clothes who do not get recycled, and for whatever bad reason ends up in nature, they need to be biodegradable. Just I think it's very important to understand that plastics have a biodegradability of 80 years. We started using plastic approximately 80 years ago. So that stuff is still around everywhere. And if you go to, let's say, some third world countries, I mean, they are, swamped with litter. And there was a time when we in Europe and also other countries, we were shipping our garbage to other countries, and we still do, to Africa to a certain extent. And Americas is sending their used clothes to Guatemala and El Salvador and Honduras and so forth. So, I mean, we need to create, just that fact is disturbing, of course. We need to create that circularity.
Well, we need to create biodegradable materials, I guess, is another way of getting around that.
Yes, we need to move away from plastics. We need to move away from plastics quickly. But I mean, as you've sensed from this, it's a complicated problem. I think it's on one side, the brands need to make conscious decisions and switch away from it, but that's only going to be enforced with legislation that incentivizes them to do it. But it also comes down to consumers. There's a huge cultural element, and this is where the fashion community has a responsibility to drive that culture. Like, that's what this industry was built on, was shaping people's perception of value. And that's, I think, something that I know we're very passionate about, is how do we help get that message out there so that everyone does demand to do better and thinks twice before they buy something cheap on Instagram. So I think that's a huge part of it.
Yeah.
And just remember, fashion industry was able to move out of cotton and flax and other materials and move in the polyesters and the nylons and the acrylics and spandex and so forth. I mean, so the brands have a lot of power. And some say, oh, we need to have the cheapest and so forth. Okay, but maybe you should also take your responsibility, because you can. You can take responsibility of this. And I think that's important to know. Also that we have actually moved towards the plastics. Now it's time to move back.
So what's the future? Like, what's the next cycle? What's the future of biomaterials or material innovation in the fashion industry?
Well, I was just going to add to your point there, because I think a lot of the need from a brand perspective or an industry perspective is to communicate and educate consumers as well. A lot of them don't really know. And, if you take like the food industry as a parallel, we're now getting calories on your menu, so you can make more informed decisions. You're now getting, well, not now, but have for a while, have got references of fat, sugar, and whatever else, and silver, sorry, not silver, red, amber, kind of green ratings.
Yep.
What if you had the same for clothing? You would be able to make much easier decisions around what you're buying and what you're buying into as a product. So that could be, again, from a biomaterials perspective, if you're educating consumers, there's a legislation piece, and also as consumers can make more informed decisions. But ultimately, to answer your question, I think in terms of biomaterials and how they scale, these guys can kind of talk more to it than I can, but I think what Renewcell have done an amazing job of is almost create new infrastructure. And that's arguably one of the most difficult challenges to take on, because, as I said before, there's an infrastructure and a whole entity that's been created through synthetic fibers and everything else that goes with that.
Yeah.
So it's difficult for a lot of businesses and supply chains to shift that quickly. So the two challenges or two opportunities you have is reinvent it, recreate it, or you create a drop into the existing infrastructure.
I fully agree, and I think, if you look at it, most of the technologies already exist. What we need is scale, and we need to scale. Your company. We need to. What you're doing is amazing. We need to scale your new textile innovations, and of course we also need to scale Renewcell and similar companies. When investors ask me, okay, so do you have any competition? Yeah, but not enough, is what I'm using to say. And the reason is that even if we now build our 60,000 metric tons, which we, by today, by the way, announced that we're going to scale to 120,000 metric tons, for 60,000 metric tons, it's 0.05% of the world market.
of the world's total textile production, or
So that's 0.5 per mil of the world market.
Yeah.
So that's, I mean, now we are at 1 per mil of the world market with a new expansion. And
so you would need 1,000 companies to get to 1%? Is my maths right here? That sounds crazy.
no, so we now have 120,000 metric tons is what we're going to scale to. And that's a lot. That's a big machinery. But you know, the market today is 110 million tons, growing to 160 million tons by the end of the decade. So we need to scale even more. And my point is, I mean, I need more competition. Because, I mean, if we go out to a shop and you can get 1 per mil of the clothes are sustainable, consumers will not see that there is sustainable alternatives. You know what I mean? So if we could get to 10% or maybe 20% of all the textiles in stores, then consumers would really switch their minds.
Yeah.
That's really when things are starting happening. So I think we should have more competition, actually, and more companies supporting and building this type of industry. So coming back then to your question, what is the next gen? What's the next thing happening? I think the question is not what is the next type. It's who is the next to scale. And for that, we need to have brands supporting, and the financial industry is already there. I mean, they talk. The last 20 years, we had a huge, or maybe 30 years, we had a huge, fantastic development in the IT sector. But the next 10, 15, 20, 50 years, we need to change the world to become sustainable. Otherwise, we don't have a world to leave our kids. So, I mean, that is the big area. And if you look at, there's not one world leader today who don't talk about sustainability. There's not one CEO who don't talk about it. There's not one consumer who doesn't see that it's important. So this is the best industry to invest in. And if you take Larry Fink, for example, who's the head of BlackRock, I mean, all the financial industry is there. What we need to do is just to hook up with the brands and support one another.
Well, I guess that's the question. How can smaller brands, I mean, Pangaia, you're working with brands, but how can smaller brands kind of find that financial support and get into that wider market? Because I guess it's just about getting your products out there, but how would they do that?
Yeah. And I think the brands can support. We have had the fortune of having H&M as a shareholder. And they get a lot of, tough press. But they're one of the few brands who actually do what they say they do. They are very strong in that. And I think that would be one way of doing it, getting a brand on board as shareholder. But the other way is also to get the financial support and just do it. Because if we're waiting too long, I mean, the time pass. So just get the pilot up. And one more thing. For us, one of the big steps that we did was we built the pilot big enough to become industrial scale. That was a good move for that put our company forward at least 5 years.
Yeah.
But I think what you said there in terms of this, not necessarily seeing the people in your space as competitors. It's almost conventional cotton or the other things that we're trying to avoid in this space are the enemy, not necessarily the things that are solves for that.
Fully agree.
And as a business, we're looking at next generation of materials and innovation. We use a lot of organic cotton. Organic cotton is less than 1% of the total cotton usage.
Yeah.
So if you put that in context, there's still a huge shift for the industry just for that. And regenerative is the next move for cotton, which we're investing in as a business in terms of agricultural and infrastructure in that regard. But to your point, as I said, there's a plethora of options that need to be scaled and commercialized, and there isn't a silver bullet right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the challenge that we've always run into as well, is the perception from those that are in this space is, oh, it's crowded. Oh, there's too much competition. It's like, no. There's, like I said, there's not enough. There's not enough of us companies doing it. And I also, from a small company, like earlier stage than these guys, one of the bigger challenges, like as being a designer coming out of the MA and then starting a company, is like that first couple years is really hard. And this is where like non-dilutive funding from governments plays a huge role. Grants, making that available to students, or brands offering to share facilities. I did the creative residency with Bolt Threads in California. Unfortunately, COVID was really badly timed and we didn't get to finish the project, but like being able to have access to equipment that you wouldn't be able to afford otherwise.
Yep.
Like little things like that make a big difference of making that jump. I also think like the design community is really passionate about this, but we don't support designers to start businesses. And I'm lucky we did the UAL Creative Accelerator. We've done a few others to help, but like no one tells designers like, oh, you can do this, you can build this. But also that collaboration element is really important.
Yeah.
And realizing that you need scientists, you need engineers, you need finance help, you need all of the players, marketing, people that tell stories, like, and figuring out like what you're really good at, what role you can play in this future economy that we're building, and then team up with others that counteract you.
Yeah. No, that makes sense, just kind of tying it all together and supporting each other and hopefully getting some government support. And we were chatting earlier about getting that kind of like financial support from the big sort of venture capitalists who might be interested in moving into that market now, because it is going to be the market in the next, well, hopefully forever from now on.
And they are very interested to move in.
Definitely.
I mean, 3 to 5 years ago, they were kind of hesitant. Now they're looking for ESG investment opportunities.
If you take textile fibers and leather alternatives as the big buckets, the investment in there is incredible. The scale is huge. And I think where brands can support in that, and particularly what Pangaia does, is try and connect earlier. Because essentially if you're creating an innovation or a technology aligned to a brand's perspective, it's easier to gain access to the
that's
industry.
interesting, yeah. It's a collaborative effort.
Exactly.
Yeah. I wanted to ask as well what your companies are working on at the moment. Maybe Jen, starting with you, is there something exciting coming up? Or
I mean, yeah, so we're building and growing. So we're building a facility in South London. We'll be able to produce more material to actually
so you're
start
scaling
doing
up.
collaboration
Yeah.
traveling. So it's a big step for us, and we're super excited. Also expanding our team. We're hiring quite a lot of roles at the moment,
Yep.
which is a big step, and looking forward to getting to make stuff.
And what will you be making?
Unfortunately, I cannot share that.
Fair enough. What about you, Patrik?
We're building plants. I mean, we're scaling. Currently, we have 370 people putting all the unit operations, the piping in the unit operations. We're starting up this plant of 60,000 metric tons this summer.
Is this in Sweden? Or?
In Sweden,
Yeah.
And we're reusing an old paper mill, actually.
Okay, because you were saying it's a similar process.
Similar process. And there we have, a good water in, we have electricity coming into the plant, we have green energy from Swedish hydropower, we have wastewater treatment systems, state of the art. And so that helps us a lot with speed and cost. And then, of course, we announced today that we are capitalizing now for expanding that 60,000 metric tons up to 120,000 metric tons. So, I mean, and from there, it depends on the brands, how much do they want, and we work with, majority of the big brands in the world today. So that's the big thing. The other thing that have happened over the last, let's say, months and so forth, is that we have shown that we can use, we can make viscose filaments. And that has sparked the sporting goods industry. So the sporting goods industry now want to move away from polyesters and use cellulose filaments instead. So that has been a lot of discussions on how we do that, and we're scaling that as well.
Why is that specific to the sporting industry?
Because if you take polyesters, that's filaments, which is filaments compared to fibers. Fibers are short, and then you spin them to be a thread. If you take filaments, they are very. It's one long thread, let's say, and that's like silk and polyester. If you take training T-shirts and shorts and so forth. That's what they use there. So we believe that we can, technically we can replace, let's say, 15, 20, 25% of the polyesters with this technology. And that's what sporting goods industry is now looking at and being very excited about.
Oh, that's great, yeah. What's happening at Pangaia?
A lot. Yes. We're very busy, a lot. So we, of course, as a business, or have a foundation of sustainability or responsible innovation, as we like to call it. So we have impact pillars that drive a lot of the conversations around what we're researching as a team. But then as a research team, we're focused mainly in 5 big buckets. So that stems from biodiversity, looking at what was stemmed out of as a move from conventional monocrop culture.
Okay.
We focus on fossil fuel free, which we have a partnership with a startup called Kintra that is the next generation of bio-based and biodegradable polyester. We focus within another pillar around ethical sourcing, and we have our proprietary technology Flower Down, which is basically a bio-based alternative to Cajsa duck down. And then the last 2 buckets are really around utilizing dyes and treatments that are enhancing water health or have a benefit for reducing any effluent treatment.
Yep.
And finally, waste reduction, circularity. Those are the 5 big buckets that we focus in.
And do you hope as well that when you, as a quite large company, when you are able to adapt all those things, that will lead to other companies seeing that it's possible to do it and sort of taking it up as well? Yeah,
as I said earlier, I think the intention for us is really to accelerate the use of material innovation. So the different avenues that we kind of allow businesses and startups, innovators access to is initially Pangaia Lab, which is this early stage platform for innovation showcase. The second of which is the Pangaia D2C brand. And then ultimately we offer that out on the business-to-business platform, as I said, which is this kind of democratization of innovation. So it really is open access. Okay, we lead with Pangaia in a commercialization sense, but ultimately the goal is to have these technologies as things that are ubiquitous within the industry. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, and also hopefully encouraging other companies to do the same thing and perhaps use the same technologies that you are in that case. I think what is refreshing for me, coming from a different space and different industry, is really this openness and keenness to work with other businesses and really have, as I say, technology more widespread. Yeah. And it's definitely a change in perspective. I think we need more of that. Collaboration, as Jen said earlier, is definitely the key. That makes sense. I'm going to shortly ask the audience if there's any questions, so if people can have a bit of a think, if there's anything you'd like to ask the panel about. But just before that, do you have any tips for people who are perhaps innovators who want their things like get their innovations out there and be used in the fashion industry, or for fashion brands that are trying to become more sustainable but kind of struggling with finding information? Is there anything that you'd like to sort of promote or that could help people? I would say do your research, understand the current space you're working within, and think about, really that kind of full holistic pathway or product cycle. What is the end of life scenario ultimately when it gets to that point? What are the inputs from a material and impact perspective? And be patient. It's going to take time to scale these things.
Yeah, I would say to brands, design for circularity, and also don't think that everything is going to look exactly the same, but you can get the same feel in the end, but maybe you need to spin the thread a little bit differently. Maybe you need to weave the textile a little bit differently. Yeah. But in the end, you can get the same feel and touch and so forth than normally what you
just to readjust their expectations a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. The other one is for young entrepreneurs and so forth. Don't think you can do it all by yourself. Try to get investors in, but also share with you. I mean, you need help. Nobody can do everything themselves. So I think it's very important to, bring in somebody that can keep a little bit of track of the money, somebody who can sell, who can, as you said, tell a story, because you also need to sell your company and so forth. So there is, surround yourself with 2, 3, 4, 5 people that have different skill set than you, but have the same drive as you.
I mean, I think I would reiterate the same point. I think the team has been the biggest fulfilling part for me in this next part of the journey is working with others that complement your skill sets and really working together on it. And also to your point, be creative. If you're a brand, like it's not as simple as just taking. Oh, my bad. Can you hear me? If you're a brand, it's not as simple as just taking the off-the-shelf solutions, which there are many. So if you research hard enough, there are sustainable options out there that are market available, and use those to help support them. But also, yeah, be creative. If it's not exactly like what you're used to working with, figure out how to work with it and make something new and even better with it. That's where the creativity really comes in.
Great, thank you so much. And are there any audience questions? Yep, we have an audience question over here. Get the mic.
Yeah, I just want to ask, what do you guys think about this idea that I learned in class? So I'm working for a vegan leather company right now, and then basically, so my boss is trying to replace animal leather with vegan leather. So what we do every day is basically testing if these leather are more stronger, or if they have like a better insulation, like different qualities, and all of these quality control tests. But I'm just always wondering why do we have to substitute animal leather and then to substitute exactly as animal leather? What I mean is because animal leather is elastic, it is warm, it is soft. Maybe lamb leather is thinner than cow leather. But I'm just wondering, why do we have to substitute it instead of what if vegan leather is better than animal leather in other sort of ways? So that we're wearing animal leather as jacket, as bags, but maybe we don't have to make exactly the same thing. If vegan leather has a different quality, I just feel maybe it's not the best for vegan leather that we have right now to make it into fashion items, but instead we can make it into interior design, or make it into transportation, all these other industries that we can make textile into. So I just feel the idea of substitution is quite weird to me. So I just want to know, what do you think about that in the biotextile industry?
It's a good question and a good debate we often have. It's definitely contingent on the use case. So 100% agree with you that it's not always a drop-in solution. And I guess the challenge, as I said earlier, is that ultimately people are trying to replace things that have been used for a long, long time. So there's a given expectation of what that material should achieve already. I think it's resetting some of those expectations, and also partnering and educating with the people that you work with internally. And also, what do you want to achieve as a business? What is the goal to create this material? Is it moving away from leather, or is it the impact criteria that you change through the use of your material?
I would also say that look into your existing material, what you have, and look at the USPs, so unique selling points that you have for that material. And promote those, and try to find the killer applications for your material as it stands today, and start developing from there. Because if you're always going to fulfill what the customer wants, there's always going to be excuses for not using, and you're going to keep on developing for the rest of your lives. Find that company who's willing to sacrifice a little bit on certain things, but trying to find your killer application, and start there.
I think you're never going to have the perfect material.
No. Customer are always going to shoot you down, but maybe in your case, your boss also, of course, want to develop further and further and see what are the boundaries of the technology. So of course keep on developing, but also don't think that you're going to develop the perfect thing before you start selling.
Yeah, and it's like I was just saying before. It's what as to Patrik's point, what do you want to stand for? And ultimately acknowledge that it's a journey. You can't solve everything all in one go. It can be iterative.
I mean, this is something I can also speak to experience from us. The industry is quick to try to put you in a bucket of what are you replacing, and which is useful to understand the products and how you can fit into different product categories. But it does come down to storytelling, education as well, and that's why we've really talked a lot. It's a textile. We can replace leather and synthetic leathers and a lot of these coated textiles that have other properties today, but it's around that education element and working with product designers who are the experts in those materials to figure out how you incorporate these new materials and have new benefits there. So it's that collaborative element, and also just how we talk about it. I think people aren't used to talking about materials, and I think it's building that cultural awareness within the industry, but also with the end consumers of what value is assigned with these materials. Because I mean, leather has been around for thousands of years, so there's that understanding. But how do we build that understanding of these new materials quicker?
Educating the public a bit more, I suppose. Do we have any other questions?
We have one from somebody from the live stream.
Oh, interesting. Is it this one here? William, yep. Okay, so the question is, do any of you see the possibility of a low-tech integration of and collaboration with biological and microbiological organisms within the design process as something that can be of global interest?
I mean, we're incorporating microorganisms, so I think that there's a global interest for it. I mean, I think the low-tech side, there's a range of technicality around working with living organisms, and I think there's ways to do it more low tech. Like beer brewing, for example, is I mean, it is actually quite technical. There's a craft behind it, and I think these craft technologies do have a place in the future world and industry. And I think we're gonna still keep elements of that and want to keep elements of that to preserve and build new craft traditions, but at the same time look at how you can also use these microorganisms for scaling. And I don't think it's an either or. I think there's huge applications for both of them in different segments of the industry that have different places in our culture. And yeah, I think there's huge opportunity.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, colorifics again is another example of that.
Exactly, yeah.
But I think biofabrication is kind of the next wave, if you like, of new innovation. And it's almost, utilizing nature as the factory of the future, if you will, to have nature sculpt and create materials for you. So absolutely.
Really exciting stuff coming up. And I would also recommend everyone here to go and look at our panelists' work, which is obviously on display in the room. And if there's no other questions, I think we're going to leave it on that note. And thank you all so much for coming and for hanging out with us tonight. And hopefully you learned something new or got an answer to your question or just had a good time in general. So thank you very much.